Hello everyone, this is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice. It's October 27th, 2021, with this week's issue of Annett's Weekly, a column of commentary. And I'm going to start off today's reflections with a quote from former US President Harry Truman, who said, "The only thing new under the sun is the history you didn't know about." And that has great relevance to what you're going to hear today. Part 1 is entitled On Hunting Indians and Other Canadian Pastimes. Well, it's always encouraging, although slightly comedic, when people finally notice the garbage they've been swilling through for many years. And that's happened again this past week up here in the Great White North. Worried pale Canucks have suddenly noticed and are publicly indignant over the hunting down and imprisoning of vaccination-refusing Aboriginal families by Mounties and soldiers. A lot of people are on the internet now decrying this activity, which apparently has been going on Cree reservations in Saskatchewan. Indians are being hunted down because they won't take the shot. Well, one can only wonder where these people who are so upset have been these past many decades. As a matter of fact, I wonder where they've been for the past century and a half in Canada. Because in this fair country, Indians have always been literal fair game, including under the law. Incidents like the one in Saskatchewan are daily events on and off the internment camps we like to call Indian reservations, because under the law in Canada, Aboriginals are not citizens but dependent wards of the state, and they have no rights at all. They've been that way under the Canada's Apartheid Indian Act since 1874. I mean, how do you think 60,000 residential school children not only were so easily killed, but then covered up without people really caring that much? It's a whole regime and mindset where it's okay to wipe out Indians. I mean, take this quote from Harriet Nahani, who's dead now, but she shared this at one of our first healing circles in 1995. Quote, "We heard a whistle early that morning and the Mounties ran ashore from their gunboat. They beat down everyone with clubs and chased the children through our village and tied them together with a long rope and loaded them on the gunboat to take them to the Catholic residential school on Mears Island. Most of those children never came back." Well, Harriet Nahani herself was pursued by Mounties after she started talking publicly in our campaign about the murder of children at the United Church Alberni Residential School. Eventually, she was arrested without a warrant, handcuffed and beaten, and left bleeding in Surrey Remand Prison. And at the age of 71, she died of those beatings on February 11th, 2005. Another story, Lorna McNaughton from Brantford, Ontario in January 2012. Then the soldiers took all those children from the Mohawk school and drove them out to a quarry outside Brantford. And they stood them in front of a ditch and they shot them all. I think it was a bulldozer. It went in after and shoved all this dirt on top of them when some of those kids were still moving. And a former RCMP officer in Surrey in October 2020, quote, "My former colleagues in the RCMP call it the hooker game. They take native women off the streets and drive them east of Vancouver to a special site in the mountains and they let them loose in the woods. They charge lots of money to rich guys to come in and hunt them down like animals. I think the going rate starts at $25,000. The hunters can either track down and shoot the women outright or capture and rape them. Then they're disposed of after and are buried in underground metal containers along the Sea to Sky Highway going up to Whistler." Well, we have to ask why the people who are now so suddenly irate about Indian hunting in Saskatchewan were so silent about it over the past quarter century when we made public many such stories of living eyewitnesses. The truth is that we have all been accommodated and willing partners to the crime in our own backyard. Our refusal to fight for those who are killed in our name with our tax dollars and church donations has made it that much easier now for the COVID police state to hunt down all of us. So, welcome to the reservation, folks. And on that note, part 2, entitled, "Verily, verily, quite contrarily, who did Larry bury?" Notes on a remarkably guilty politician. Someone, I think it was me, once observed that the Canadian Senate is where you are sent to be either paid off or shut off. Other than that, this unelected and unaccountable gravy train doesn't seem to have much of a purpose besides to exercise veto power over those few bills that are passed in Parliament. The Senate's actually a perfect refuge for people with a lot to hide. Guys like Larry Campbell. Now, you probably haven't heard much about Larry, even though he was consecutively a drug squad Mountie, the chief coroner of Vancouver, and then the mayor of Vancouver, before he was handed a plush Senate seat in 2005 by his good buddy Prime Minister Paul the Fixer Martin. The trained seals, called the Canadian media, have made a point not to report Larry's antics, no doubt because they implicate wealthy guys who don't want their names in the papers. But in recent times, Larry has been an even naughtier boy than he was during his salad days on the West Coast. I mean, what can I say about a drug cop who never busted a single dealer? A coroner who issued fake death certificates and who granted access to the city morgue to the highest bidders, and a mayor who presided over the cover-up of serial killing by cops on the streets of Vancouver. And that was just for starters. During the late 1990s, Larry and his buddy, the future Prime Minister, were both spotted by undercover agents attending the snuff film orgies at the infamous Piggy's Palace in Coquitlam, where Aboriginal women who were provided by the RCMP were ritually tortured, raped, and then killed. Well, fortunately for Larry and Paul, their substandard IQ body disposal guy named Willie Picton was positioned by the Mounties and a complicit media to take the fall for that slaughter. And so, dear readers, what better place to hide somebody like Larry Campbell and a murder weapon than in the ostentatious halls of the Canadian Senate? Clearly, Larry felt safe there, for in the years after his appointment, he felt free to consort even more with offshore killers, Chinese drug dealers, and money laundering operations on the West Coast. According to Grant Wakefield, one of the Canadian Security Intelligence agents who tailed Larry, quote, Larry Campbell has been the government's point man in the Chinese takeover of the British Columbia economy. That's why he's still so untouchable. Well, that's not to say Larry hasn't messed up a few times. He is only mortal after all, and an especially greedy mortal at that. The River Rock Casino in Richmond, described by the Vancouver police as, quote, a major center of money laundering and criminal activity, hired the just appointed Senator Larry Campbell onto its board of directors in 2005 and paid him a retainer to act as its, quote, special consultant with the government. Translated, that means he was the bagman. But I suppose Larry's $151,000 Senate salary couldn't pay his bills or something. Because even after River Rock executives were arrested and charged in BC courts in 2018, Larry stayed on loyally and served the company and kept his position on their board after having earned over $3 million from its criminal largesse. Well, incidentally and not coincidentally, River Rock and his partner, the Great Canadian Gaming Company, contributed over $80,000 to Larry Campbell's political party called Vision, as early as 2005. Well, so did a bevy of organized crime groups from China, Macau, and Hong Kong, according to Peter German, a former RCMP investigator. Well, clearly the crooks and killers knew a good bet when they saw it in the corpulent Mr. Campbell. Of course, these felonious endeavors pale when compared to the more spectacular crime of the Chinese absorption of Western Canada, a decades-long coup that Larry Campbell has helped to broker as a top senatorial ally of both the Harper and Trudeau governments. In the words of former CSIS agent Grant Wakefield, Canada's status as a Chinese colony is a done deal now, thanks to the efforts of high-placed crooks like Larry Campbell. Those Chinese death squads that now operate so freely in northern British Columbia might as well have his name written all over them. Well, let's not be too hard on the old boy. Larry seems to have retained a trace of human feelings. Last year, the illustrious senator hurled a weepy and outraged email at me after I had publicly mentioned his role in the disappearance of Aboriginal women in Vancouver. Well, Larry didn't deny the charge or even launch a lawsuit against me, because the guilty never do. He just called me an asshole in print. Back to you, Larry. And part 3. Still on the West Coast. It's entitled, Will Rev Kev Finally Find True Happiness at His Alma Mater? Well, this past week, no doubt to Larry Campbell's chagrin, some uppity University of British Columbia students defied the national blacklisting of yours truly and invited me to be part of an academic panel debate on, guess what? Indian residential schools. It's scheduled for the campus for November 17th. And, of course, they're not going to talk about a lot of stuff, and I intend to bring up a lot of things there which they didn't plan on doing it, which is likely why it's not going to happen. Needless to say, I was delighted to receive the invitation, since I grew up in the UBC neighborhood and won my 3 academic degrees there. But frankly, I am curious to see whether or not the offer is going to get withdrawn and I'm not going to be able to speak there, because that's the way it's been for me, and the little matter of the Canadian genocide and the death camps they still call residential schools, it's been that way for over 20 years now on campuses from UBC to Oxford University and Harvard. All of them. I was invited, and then the invitation was withdrawn. When it comes to addressing one's homegrown crimes against humanity, academia is a one-party state, and scholarly discourse is as constrained as a gag order. But hey, let's not worry about that. Let's indulge our credulity for a moment and prove me wrong. Let's assume that the great debate will go ahead smoothly on November 17th, and that the usual gang of paid disruptors will not be on hand to malign and distract. Here are a few sneak preview thoughts to stir the pot a little bit and get the RCMP and the university administrators even more worried than they already are. Well, to kick things off, I intend to remind the august body that the UBC campus is a remarkably appropriate place to hold such a debate for 3 reasons. First, it contains archival proof of the deliberate mass murder of generations of Indian children by church, state, and big money. Secondly, the campus administrators have actively suppressed and concealed that evidence. And finally, the campus itself is the site of the mass graves of Aboriginal people today. In short, dear old UBC is a big crime scene. If such opening remarks don't cause my microphone to be immediately turned off and my Royal Irish ass kicked off the campus by the UBC security wannabe cops, I'll be very surprised. Because the big corporations that are still stealing West Coast lands and resources and killing Indians just happen to be some of the major funders of the university, and their officials routinely serve as UBC chancellors, presidents, and on the board of governors. Companies like BC Hydro, Timberwest, HSBC Bank, and PetroChina. And the latter company even runs its own private army and death squads in northern British Columbia that terrorize Indians off their land to grab the liquid natural gas, courtesy of not only Larry Campbell, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who legalized that present genocide with his Foreign Investment Protection Act. Okay, so never let it be said that I don't like to kick the biggest butt in town. As they say, you either kick it or you lick it. Unfortunately, I've aimed my brogans at the child killers' behinds knowledgeably, with lots of evidence to back me up. I first came across that evidence as a doctoral student at UBC in the fall of 1995, after I had been summarily thrown out of my job as a minister in the United Church for talking about all their dead little Indians. The evidence I'm referring to is 88 spools of government microfilm in the UBC Kerner Library that are filled with Indian residential school documents going back to 1889. Those records, with their proof of planned extermination and an average 50% death rate in the schools spanning a half century, proves that the Crown and its churches have generations of blood on their hands. A fact that's even being affirmed by Canadian and international courts. It's on the record. You can see some of that at murderbydecree.com. Just look under ITCCS archives. It's all there. The problem is never the lack of evidence. The problem is the crooks still being in charge. Well, naturally, neither the killers nor their accomplices appreciate their murder weapons being surfaced like that. So UBC as well eventually showed me the door during my graduate program, with a few nudges from the United Church, which used its influence to block funding from my doctoral program and obstruct any of my future speaking engagements at UBC. But it wasn't just documents that had them worried. For just south of the campus on the Musqueam Indian Reserve lie mass graves of Native women who routinely vanish from Vancouver streets, as well as spillover remains taken from other body dumping sites around the province. That's according to an RCMP officer named George Finlay and a Musqueam Reserve employee named Les Gurin, who disinterred the remains and actually had the bones analyzed, and sure enough they were pig and remains mixed with female bones. And the police and media studiously ignored that evidence when it first surfaced. Well, as George Finlay, the RCMP officer, said, quote, "Everybody knows about those body dumping sites, including the UBC administration. It's just like our own bullshit RCMP investigation into the residential schools. We were told as early as 1998 never to look into anything that might incriminate the churches or the feds. Well, and so it goes here in the Great White North, and at my lovely old alma mater, where academic censorship is the name of the game, so that all the corpses, past, present, and future, will remain neatly tucked away and forgotten. Well, that said, I can't help but wonder whether I am incurably naive after all. For some part of me still can't understand why I'm so hated by the UBC bigwigs, like former President Martha Piper, who declared in 2003, quote, "Kevin Annett is not welcome on this campus." I mean, all I did, people, was to take seriously UBC's official motto, which is tuum est, and that means it's up to you. I guess they didn't mean me. This is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice, murderbydecree.com, republicofcanada.ca. Stay tuned for more.